Welcome back. This time we're talking about Legion, Season 1, Episode 8, Chapter 8, which just so happens to be the season finale. And from the beginning, this has been a series that has tried to turn television as we know it, as well as the X-Men franchise as we know it, on its head. So it really should not have been a big surprise to me that the finale of this series may just be its most straightforward episode so far. A lot of shows like to go crazy, wacky in their finale. In this case, this was an episode that, with a very few exceptions, actually takes place in the real world, not in the astral projections or in David's mind, and tells a pretty straightforward, understandable story. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about in this review is less about trying to make sense of what did happen, although there are definitely some things I do want to talk about. But this is going to be mostly about some of the big things that have remained mysteries throughout the series, what got answered, what still remains a mystery, as well as what we can expect going forward into Season 2. And speaking of Season 2, if you did not watch the finale all the way through the end credits, stop this video now, pause it, go back to your TV, watch through the credits, because there is something waiting for you, then come back, hit play, and we can keep on going. So if you had to do that, welcome back. Now let's talk about Chapter 8. This episode was sort of the culmination of what we've been seeing throughout this season, both with Division 3 as well as the Shadow King and his invasion of David's body. Instead of picking up right after the cliffhanger where we saw the agent from the first episode, who we've learned in this episode is named Clark, return with a bunch of soldiers to take David into custody and basically kill everybody else. We do get there, but first we actually flash back to Clark shortly after he was what we thought had been incinerated during the attack on the Division 3 facility in which David was rescued by everyone else from our main cast. We learn that he was married, that he has a husband, and they together have I'm assuming an adopted son. He's African American. They're both white. They're basically the most progressive family that you could imagine. Now, two things in this whole sequence, because it's, for the most part, it's just setting up that he's on this revenge mission, that he cannot get David out of his head, what happened to him, his disfigurement, and he wants retribution. He wants to go to war, as he puts it. But two things that did pop up in this scene. One is the fact that he does refer to his partner as his husband, as well as the computers that we get to see in Division 3's offices. In both cases, that seems to be leading us to the fact that this is present day. It's not been terribly long that homosexual couples could call their partners husband. Now, this could just be that he's calling his husband a husband because that's how he feels. But if it's a legal thing, that definitely brings this time frame forward. I've discussed multiple times about when this show is actually happening. The vast majority of the visuals have that late 70s, early 80s feel. But in last episode, we heard Amy mention the word email. And then in this same sequence, this flashback sequence, we see the computers, and they look pretty much like modern day iMacs. So again, when this is actually happening is still a big mystery, but there's definitely enough clues to make us think that there is a strong possibility that it's actually present day. But moving on from that, because that's something we really don't have an answer yet for, is that we catch up to where we saw Clark confronting David and the rest in his nice suit with his cane. It's a pretty cool looking cane. But their assault ends pretty quickly when David, who now has control of himself, although he's still wearing the helmet thing, basically takes out all the other soldiers and turns them into some kind of like tree figurine or something. It was weird and creepy, and you can tell that Clark realizes that he is way over his head. But what we also see is that he's being monitored by other Division 3 agents who are preparing to send in a second team, although they hold off to get some more information before they do so. we do get to see our various characters debating what to do with Clark. Some of them want him just to be killed. Some of them want to interrogate him and find out more information about their enemy, Division 3. The most important conversation, however, to me at least, during this whole part of the episode was David talking to Sid. And his whole thing, and this is sort of his main drive in this episode, is trying to determine what exactly is real and what is not. He now knows, or at least he thinks he knows, that the Shadow King is the source of all of his problems. But as someone who's been dealing with mental problems and people treating him for those mental problems, he knows that when an answer like the Shadow King is presented, it's too simple. It's, if he really is schizophrenic and he is sick, the idea that the Shadow King is actually the cause of all of that is almost a clear symptom of his insanity. So what he's saying is like, yes, he wants to get this out of his head. He wants to be able to move forward, but it can't be about himself, because if he's doing this for himself, then he's basically falling into his sickness, and that he's trying to find a way out when there might not be, because he's actually sick. So he has to be doing it for Sid. He has to be doing it for other people. And I thought that was a very interesting way to approach his character, especially moving forward, when we find out just what David is like without the Shadow King. We've seen him beaten down and sort of just, broken. Then we saw him, well, it wasn't really him, but it was, him with the Shadow King under control. And as I mentioned in the previous review, at the end of that episode was the first time that we really got to see the true David being in control of his own body. But as we learn in this episode, he's not terribly comfortable with that yet, because he's waiting for the other shoe to drop. And of course, that other shoe being that the Shadow King is beginning to break loose from his container. And instead of attacking David directly, he's actually reaching out to Sid, because apparently part of him remained in her after they merged, David and Sid merged in the pilot episode. And she had him in her head for a little while, and some of that residue remains, allowing him to reach out to her and basically, say, if you want to save this man that you love, you need to help me, because they're going to try to rip me out of David, and I'm going to kill David along the way unless you make sure I get out. They want to kill me. I want free. Without you helping me, both of those scenarios end with David dead. Now, the second most interesting conversation to me, again, during this whole part of the episode, was Melody talking to Clark and kind of just, feeling each other out. Obviously they've been enemies for a while, both organizations. But this is probably one of the very few times they were able to actually sit down and just kind of talk it out. And here Clark does say some interesting things about Division 3, which I'm going to actually look at my notes here and quote directly. He refers to Division 3 as a tactical arm of the U.S. military working in conjunction with governments all around the world. That definitely sounds pretty scary and much larger an organization than we may have thought it was, from what little we'd seen thus far. Now on the flip side, Melanie definitely gets a dig in there, talking about how had they taken David out initially, they probably would have succeeded. But now David knows how powerful he is, and she refers to him as a world breaker. He's that powerful. And that's probably not even taking into account the Shadow King part of the equation. I'm not entirely sure if Melody knew that they were being recorded. I would imagine not. But if she did, that was a definite threat to the rest of Division 3 to, hey, stay away from us. And whether they actually do or not is unclear, especially with the post-credit sequence, which I'll get to later. So of course, Carrie and Oliver are working together to get the Shadow King out of David. Exactly what it's doing and what would happen to the Shadow King once he was removed is never really explained, but they have those cool little red laser things. I'm guessing that was maybe some kind of containment field, because it obviously doesn't stop Sid from getting in. But they do a nice job of sort of, maybe they will work, because it does seem to really be damaging the Shadow King and limiting his ability to affect David even inside his mind. And we do get a good line from David during all of this, kind of emphasizing that point that I made earlier about he doesn't know what his life is without him. He actually says, "Who am I without you?" He doesn't remember a life where he did not have the Shadow King in his head. Who is David when it's just David? He doesn't even know at this point. But of course, the Shadow King begins fighting back, is apparently about to kill David when Sid intervenes and kisses him, which allows the Shadow King to transfer into her body. I'm guessing that she was presuming to sacrifice herself. I doubt she expected that he would go straight for female Carrie, which turned out to be a pretty good choice because she's very powerful in her own right, takes out pretty much everybody else. She does that thing where she shoots her finger at Melody. I don't know if that was some kind of ability from her or if it was mental powers from the Shadow King. Either way, it was cool, and I really thought Melody was dead, especially when we very shortly thereafter hear Oliver actually remember who Melody is. But David, of course, they have this big, running down the hall. David looking like lightning. Carrie looking almost like fire. I made a big deal last episode talking about who created the fire that burned Clark. Based on what I saw and how that visually looked from Carrie, if that was indeed her power manifesting, then I would say it was Carrie. To me, that still seems the most likely option, that it was Carrie. We've seen her power be able to manifest weapons. She has that bat with the nails that she seems to pull out of nothingness. If the whole little, finger gun thing was actually her power, then her ability to create fire, it seems like her ability as a whole is to manifest and use weapons. So that seems to be the more likely of the two, although with the Shadow King in her body at the time, it could have been his power. My argument there is that in the initial attack, if the invaders, which were Sid and Tanami and the telekinesis guy and whoever else was there as well, if they were not planning on the whole place going up in an inferno, then I think they would have been said something about it. Like, David, holy crap, you just burned everybody. But it seemed like they were planning for that, especially with Sid warning him to get under the water. It's still not clear. I'm guessing if Clark is remaining at the facility and they might actually be working together, that's going to have to come out. He was definitely there for revenge, and whoever did cause him to be disfigured like that, there's going to have to be some kind of resolution to that. They made too much of a deal of it in the opening moments of this episode for it to not be resolved at some point in time. So my bet is still on Carrie, although I can't say for certain that it was actually her. But of course, they meet. They sort of have this little mental explosion, and the Shadow King is dispelled from Carrie, and he ends up going into Oliver, who then leaves the facility in that little presidential car thing that looked pretty cool, and is singing, and they're gone. Where they're going, we don't really know, but it does seem like they're still looking for it. The Shadow King mentioned it again, like he did when he was interrogating Amy in the astral projection, where he was saying, "Where is it? Where is it?" So there's definitely an it involved in the Shadow King's quest. We just don't know yet what it is. And that was essentially the episode. We get to see that all of our main characters had survived. David talks to Clark and says, we have to work together. And Clark's like, yeah, I know what the enemy is now. But earlier, the division agents that had been watching him had said that they were going to send in Equinox. What is Equinox? I don't know. It could be what we saw at the end credits, which is that little ball thing that basically stole David. If that is the case, what does that mean for Clark, since he, I would imagine, is still at the facility with everyone else? Or is it a new third party? I have honestly no clue what that thing was, who sent it, and what does it mean. That's obviously, aside from the Shadow King being free and in Oliver's body, that thing that took David and where it's taking him is definitely the biggest mystery moving forward, as far as, the direct story mysteries. And essentially that was our episode. Like I said, it was pretty straightforward. We got a few answers, we got a few possible answers, and some definite new mysteries. I am curious, and that end scene of the credits was at night. What was happening earlier was during the day, so there has been some time to pass. I am curious how Melanie is going to feel about Sid, because it was her actions that eventually let the Shadow King free, and to take Oliver, her husband, who she had just finally gotten back after 20 years. I'm guessing there's probably going to be some friction there. And speaking of friction between characters, it seems like the two Carries have gotten over theirs after their near-death experience, in which Carrie had been, controlled by the Shadow King and attacked the other Carrie, and as he put it, ruptured his spleen. I had presumed that the big character mystery was going to be how, again, is David going to react to being free. He is essentially sane, but definitely not well after having been, essentially invaded for his entire life. Of course, that's been superseded by the fact that he's been kidnapped by something or someone. I said in my very first review of this show that I know very, very, very little about these characters. And really, I only know one thing about David, and I'm not going to talk about it because it has not been revealed in this show, although there was a definite clue to it in the previous episode, in episode 7. But beyond that, I really know nothing about these characters. I know nothing about the storylines as they exist in the comics. And I've really enjoyed not knowing, because this show has done such a good job of just setting up interesting situations with interesting characters and delivering it in a way that we really have not seen before. This is a very unique show in how it delivers its story, both visually and in the actual storytelling itself. So that's essentially what I wanted to talk about. I'm sure I probably forgot some things here or there. I might do sort of a season-wide recap. I might even do a rewatch of the show and take some additional notes and do a video later on in the summer before the show returns for a second season. I honestly don't even know when that's going to be. Presumably it'll be next spring, like this was a spring show this year. If so, we've got plenty of time until then. But for now, what did you think of this episode? What did you think of the series? What did you think about some of the mysteries that I brought up and some of the possible explanations that we got in this episode, such that Carrie was the one that caused the fire in episode 1? What do you think moving forward, the position of Division 3 and our mutant heroes are going to be, if they're going to kind of work together to go after the Shadow King? And who do you think, unless it has to do with the comics, I really don't want any spoilers from the comics, but if it's not from the comics and you just have some speculation on what the little ball thing that stole David at the end is, gladly put that down below as well. I enjoy having these conversations, and I hope to continue them, especially in season 2. So as always, you can subscribe to my channel, check out some other TV and movie reviews, and until next time, be careful of flying balls outside your bedroom window. I mean, that sounded way dirtier when I said it than when I thought it in my head.